She was once a respected teacher, the kind every student remembered years later, calm, patient, and quietly strong. But now, in her old age, her own son called her forgetful, claiming she was losing her mind. What no one knew was that behind her gentle silence, Grace carried a secret buried for 26 years, one that could destroy not only her son's life, but her own redemption. This is a story about betrayal, guilt, and the kind of love that hurts before it heals. Stay until the end, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and share if real stories still move you. The Whitmore house stood at the end of a sloping drive lined with oaks, their October leaves drifting down in orange spirals. From the window you could see the faint shimmer of Asheville's hills, soft blue and far away. Inside, the table gleamed under warm light, white linen silver cutlery, crystal glasses filled halfway with Sauvignon Blanc. It was a dinner meant to look perfect, but perfection that night had splinters. Grace Whitmore, 68, sat straight-backed in her chair, a habit carried from years of teaching English at a local high school. Her hands, knotted with veins, rested neatly on the edge of the table. She smiled at her son Evan across from her. "You've done well," she said softly. "Your home feels lived in now." Evan's jaw twitched before he smiled, a practiced, polite smile that never reached his eyes. "We try Mom." His wife Clara glided between them with a bottle of wine, topping off glasses, though Grace's was barely touched. Clara was beautiful in a way that seemed curated, her every movement calculated for symmetry, for image. "You'll love the salmon, Grace," she said. "Wild-caught. Organic." Evan picked at himself. "It smells lovely," Grace replied. "May I have a little more, sweetheart?" She used the word gently, as she always had when Evan was a boy who scraped his knees on summer sidewalks. But the word landed differently now, like a pebble against glass. Evan looked up, fork suspended. "You've had plenty, Mom." His tone was sharp, almost embarrassed. Grace blinked. "Just a small piece?" You don't need more salt or butter," he interrupted. "Doctor said too much fat messes with memory." His voice was loud enough that the children, Lily and Max, looked up from their plates. Clara's hand brushed his arm, an unspoken warning, but he didn't notice. Evan Grace said quietly, "I wasn't talking about you never listen," he snapped. And before the next breath, his hand reached for the glass nearest him. Cold water splashed across the table over her plate and onto her face. It wasn't a hard throw. It wasn't violent in the cinematic sense. But it was enough. The world seemed to stop on the sound of water striking porcelain. The children gasped. Clara's mouth parted, but no words came. Grace sat still, drops sliding down her cheeks, clinging to her chin. Her expression didn't harden. It simply quieted. She dabbed her face with the corner of her napkin, eyes fixed on her son as though she might still find the boy she remembered, the one who used to run barefoot through the garden yelling for her to see his fireflies. "It's fine," she whispered finally. "It's just water." Evan pushed back his chair. "You always make everything about you." The words hung like smoke. Clara muttered something about the children and hurried them upstairs, leaving plates half-finished. The house grew heavy with the echo of what had just happened. Grace didn't cry. Instead, she gathered the wet napkin, folded it perfectly, and placed it beside her plate. "I'll clean this," she said. "No, Mom." Evan muttered, rubbing his temples. "Just leave it." "Of course," she answered. Her voice was steady, but her eyes, once bright with the habit of compassion, had turned distant, as if they were listening to something only she could hear. She rose careful not to scrape the chair against the floor. In the kitchen, she stood by the sink for a long time. Her reflection in the window was blurred by condensation, and behind it, the faint outline of the mountains. There had been a time she taught her students how words could wound, how silence could heal. Now she understood the reverse, how silence could be its own cruelty. Clara appeared in the doorway, arms folded. "He didn't mean it, Grace." Grace nodded. "Of course not. He's under stress. The project downtown fell apart. Investors pulled out. He's trying to survive." Grace smiled thinly. "Yes, we all are." Clara hesitated, then reached out as if to touch her shoulder, but stopped midway. Maybe Maybe you should see someone, she said softly. A doctor, just to check. You've been forgetting things lately. Grace's brows lifted. Forgetting little things. Clara continued quickly. Where you left your keys? The oven? It's nothing, just precaution. Precaution. Grace repeated, tasting the word like something foreign. I see. The next morning, Evan left early for a meeting. Clara packed lunches for the children and kissed them goodbye. Grace watched from the porch as the car disappeared down the hill, leaving her in the stillness of late autumn air. She pressed her fingers to her cheek. The skin was dry now, but she could still feel the coolness of the water, the sting of humiliation settling beneath it. In her chest, something fragile gave way, not anger, but an ache older than memory. She whispered to herself, "You taught him kindness, and he learned control." Later, she sat at the table again, now cleared sunlight glinting off the silverware. She touched the napkin folded from the night before. It was stiff, still faintly damp. She unfolded it, slowly, laid it flat, and smoothed it with her palm. The house was quiet, except for the clock ticking in the hall. A teacher's mind never stopped grading, analyzing, finding the moral of a story. But that morning there was no moral to be found, only the stillness after a storm no one would ever name. Grace Whitmore woke to the sound of her alarm clock humming softly beside the bed. The sunlight crept through the lace curtains, scattering pale patterns across the quilt she had brought from her old house in Raleigh. Her hands trembled as she reached to stop the ringing, the button blurring before her eyes. It had started weeks ago. The faint quiver in her fingers, the way names slipped away mid-sentence like birds startled from a branch. She told herself it was normal, the slow forgetting that comes with age, but there was something unfamiliar in this fog. It felt placed as though someone had pressed it into her mind. In the kitchen, Clara was humming to herself, the rhythmic clink of spoons against china marking breakfast time. The children were already gone to school, their backpacks lined neatly by the door, their absence leaving the house too quiet. Grace sat at the counter, trying to steady her hands around the teacup. Rough morning, Clara asked lightly. A little shaky, Grace admitted. I couldn't remember if I'd fed the cat or not. Clara's expression softened the way one might look at a child who dropped something fragile. Don't worry, it happens. I've been talking to Dr. Shaw about you. He thinks maybe a supplement could help with focus, something gentle. A supplement? Grace asked, her brow lifting. Yes, Clara said, pulling a small amber bottle from her purse. The label was crisp, typed in clean medical font, Cedarex, 25 milligrams. It's for memory and rest, Clara continued. Dr. Shaw says it's safe, non-habit forming. It'll help you feel more steady. Grace turned the bottle in her palm. Dr. Shaw, she repeated slowly. That's Evan's doctor, isn't it? Yes, but he's internal medicine, Clara said quickly. He knows these things. Just take one each morning after breakfast. Grace smiled faintly, though her stomach tightened. Thank you, dear. When Clara left for work, the house settled into its midday stillness. The clock ticked steadily in the hallway, and the refrigerator hummed its low, mechanical breath. Grace set the amber bottle on the kitchen table and studied it. The label listed a pharmacy downtown, a name she didn't recognize. She unscrewed the cap, pouring one white oval pill into her hand. It caught the light like a pearl. She hesitated, the old nurse's daughter, in her whispering questions she couldn't quite voice. What did Clara say? Memory and rest. Grace reached for her reading glasses and tilted the bottle closer. The fine print blurred her hands, trembling again. She fetched her phone, sat by the window, where the light was better, and typed the word into Google Cedarex. The search results unfolded in clinical precision. Cedarex, a mild antipsychotic prescribed for anxiety-related psychosis, agitation, or symptoms of schizophrenia. Common side effects include fatigue, tremors, and short-term memory impairment. Grace's throat went dry. Her heart began to thud softly, steadily, like distant knocking. She reread the line about memory loss, then looked at the pill resting in her palm. For a long moment, she didn't move. Then, slowly, she closed her hand around it and slipped it into her apron pocket. The world outside looked deceptively calm, lawns mowed, mailboxes gleaming, the neighbor's dog barking at nothing. But inside, Grace felt the edges of something terrible taking shape. That evening, when Evan returned from work, she was sitting at the dining table again, the same spot where the water had hit her face days earlier. The tablecloth had been washed, the stain gone, but the memory lingered like an aftertaste. "Mom," he said with a tired sigh, setting his briefcase down. "Did you take your medication today?" "Medication?" she asked mildly. "Clara's supplement. She told me she gave it to you." "Oh, yes." Grace said, her voice light. "I took it after breakfast." It was a lie smooth and practiced. Evan smiled faintly, relief softening his jaw. "Good. She worries, you know. You've been a bit scattered lately. Have you forgot Max's birthday last week?" Grace looked down at her hands. "I remembered," she said quietly. "I just didn't say anything because no one seemed to need me to." Evan frowned, opening his mouth to respond, but Clara called from upstairs, saving him the trouble. Grace sat very still, her hands folded. The lie tasted bitter, but she held it like a secret she couldn't afford to lose. That night, when the house had gone silent again, she crept into the bathroom with her reading glasses and the pill bottle. She laid a white towel across the counter, poured out 5 of the small tablets, and examined each one closely. They looked identical, harmless, their smooth coating glistening under the light. She lined them up neatly like soldiers, then slipped them into an old tin of mints and hid it at the back of her vanity drawer. She stared at her reflection in the mirror. The woman staring back was thinner than she remembered her face, lined but strong, her eyes dark with confusion, and something sharper beneath it, fear, mixed with the faint spark of anger. "You taught literature for 30 years, she murmured. "You can read between the lines." In the days that followed, the symptoms grew stranger. She would lose track of time, forget words, mid-conversation wake, from naps, disoriented and sweating. Each morning, Clara would set the Ceterex bottle beside her tea, watching until she pretended to swallow one. "Feeling better?" Clara asked one morning. "Yes," Grace lied. "I think the medicine's helping." Clara smiled, satisfied. "Good. We'll keep it going for a while." But at night, when the family slept, Grace would empty her teacup into the sink and listen to the faint buzz in her head, a sound that was not entirely her own imagination. Her hands were shaking again. She pressed them flat on the counter until they stilled. She began to write in a small notebook she kept in her dresser drawer, her handwriting tidy, each letter. Deliberate. Day 4. Still dizzy. Pretend to take pill. Need to find Dr. Shaw's office. Ask about prescription. She underlined the last sentence twice. Outside, the first frost of winter had begun to cling to the grass, glittering under the porch light. Grace sat at her desk, the open bottle beside her, and wondered when her home had begun to feel like a clinic. The rain came softly that Thursday evening, tapping against the windows like a visitor too polite to insist. Grace sat in the living room, the lamp beside her throwing a small pool of light across the open pages of a novel she could no longer follow. Words blurred. Sentences slipped away from her, as if they refused to stay put. Upstairs, the sound of Clara's heels crossed the hallway. There was laughter, the brief kind exchanged over a phone call, hushed and satisfied. When the laughter ended, a door clicked shut. Grace waited a moment, then rose from her chair, her joints stiff from sitting too long. She moved quietly, listening to the house breathe around her. The settling of old wood, the faint hum of the refrigerator, the clock marking time without mercy. She paused by the study door. The light inside was off, but she could see the faint glow of the computer screen still active on the desk. Clara always kept her office meticulously neat. Files stacked evenly, pens aligned like instruments in a surgical tray. It was the room of someone who believed order could hide intent. Grace turned the handle gently. It opened without resistance. The smell of lavender and printer ink hung in the air. On the desk sat a thin folder labeled Whitmore Medical. Her name typed cleanly beneath the heading made her chest tighten. She hesitated, listening again. The house was silent. She sat in Clara's chair and opened the folder. Inside were photocopies of medical reports, stamped with official hospital logos. At the top, in neat blue ink, was a signature, Hannah Ross, MD. The words below it caught her breath. Progressive cognitive decline. Patient demonstrates confusion, memory loss, and impaired judgment. Recommended long-term supervision. There were charts notes and even a recent photograph one Clara must have taken without her knowing. The date printed across the top was 3 months ago, the same week. Clara began handing her the Ceterex. Grace's pulse thudded in her ears. The air in the room felt suddenly thinner. She read the document again, slower, this time her teacher's mind examining the spacing of the letters, the angle of the signature. She had once graded hundreds of essays by hand. She knew the rhythm of ink and handwriting. Something about the signature was wrong. Hannah Ross always looped her R, always signed with a flourish at the end. This signature was neat, exact, mechanical. Grace lifted the page closer to the lamp, her eyes narrowing. The paper smelled faintly of glue. It was a photocopy of a photocopy, clean without depth. She flipped to the second page and saw a note recommending protective guardianship for the patient. A single line underlined twice immediate evaluation necessary to ensure safety of estate. That phrase, safety of estate, felt like a blade. She closed the folder, her hands shaking, and sat still, until the sound of Clara's voice drifted from upstairs again. Only when she heard the shower running did she rise, replace the folder, and step quietly out of the office. In her room, she sat on the bed, pressing her palms together until they stopped trembling. She reached for her old address book, the one she kept in the nightstand. Dr. Hannah Ross's number was written in faded ink from years ago, back when Grace still went in for annual checkups. She dialed slowly, half expecting no answer. But after the third ring, a familiar voice came through, warm, alert, and unmistakably real. "This is Dr. Ross," Hannah Grace whispered. "It's Grace Whitmore. Do you still remember me?" A pause, then a soft laugh. "Of course I do. How are you, dear? It's been, 5 years? Almost 6. Grace hesitated. "Hannah, did you ever sign a report for me? Something about cognitive decline?" Another pause, this one longer. "No, doctor," Ross said finally. "Why has someone been using my name?" Grace closed her eyes. "There's a document here with your signature. It says I'm losing my memory. It's very official looking." Grace Hannah said gently, "I haven't examined you since you moved. I'd never write a report without seeing you. If someone forged that, you need to be careful." Grace felt tears prick her eyes. "I thought maybe I was imagining it. Lately things have been strange." "You're not imagining it," Hannah said. "Do you want me to come by? We can talk privately." "Not yet," Grace whispered. "Please, not yet. I'll call again soon." She ended the call before her voice could break. Outside, the rain had stopped, but the air felt heavy, swollen with what it hadn't yet released. She moved to the window and looked out over the garden. The porch light caught the silver edges of puddles. In the glass, her reflection stared back at her, small, steady, and tired. Downstairs, Clara's laughter floated again, this time lower, private. Grace turned from the window, walked to her dresser, and pulled open the bottom drawer. Inside, she placed a small notebook and a folded envelope containing the number Hannah had repeated twice before they hung up. She closed the drawer quietly, her hand resting on the handle. For years, she had taught her students about truth, how it bends under pressure, how it reveals itself only when someone dares to hold it up to the light. She had believed in honesty as a compass. Now that compass was spinning in her own home, and the person holding it was the one who called her Mom. She lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling. The house creaked softly around her, as though it too had learned to lie. The next morning, Grace dressed with the kind of precision that belonged to another life. Her gray wool coat pressed slacks, the pearl earrings Robert had given her on their 25th anniversary. Small armor pieces against a world she no longer trusted. The sky above Asheville was pale, stretched thin by winter. She took the bus downtown, clutching her handbag like something fragile, her fingers tracing the faint seam where the leather had begun to fray. She hadn't been to the bank in months. Evan and Clara had insisted on handling her finances to make things easier, but after discovering the forged medical reports, easier had started to sound a lot like invisible. When she entered the lobby of Highland Federal, the cool air smelled of polish and paper. The teller, a young man with kind eyes, smiled. "Good morning, Mrs. Whitmore. What can we do for you today? I'd like to check the balance on my savings account," she said, setting her ID and checkbook on the counter. "Of course, just a moment." He typed quickly, the faint tapping of keys breaking the silence. His expression shifted almost imperceptibly, something caught between confusion and discomfort. "Mrs. Whitmore, could you confirm your address for me?" She did. "And your last withdrawal? I haven't made one in over a year?" His fingers paused above the keyboard. "It shows here there were multiple transfers over the past 6 months, smaller amounts at first, then larger ones. The most recent was 3 weeks ago." Grace felt her stomach twist. "How much 420,000 was the original total?" he said softly. "There's about 32,000 left." She blinked. "That's not possible. There's an authorized signatory on the account," the teller said, gently turning the screen toward her. Her eyes followed the name printed in neat capital letters, Evan Whitmore. The room tilted slightly. She steadied herself against the counter. "My son?" she whispered. "Yes, ma'am. He's listed as your financial guardian." Guardian. The word cut through her like a blade. Who gave him that authority? "According to our records, you did," he said, his voice almost apologetic. "The form's signed and notarized. Would you like to see it?" Grace nodded. Her vision blurred as he retrieved the document. The signature at the bottom looked like hers, slanted, careful, but the flourish was wrong. She had not written that line. Not ever. "I never signed this," she said. "I understand," the teller murmured. "Would you like me to contact our fraud department?" "No," she said quickly. "Not yet." Her voice wavered but didn't break. "Could you print a copy for me, please?" He hesitated, then quietly slipped a sheet into an envelope and handed it across the counter. "I hope everything's all right, Mrs. Whitmore." "So do I," she whispered. The wind outside was sharper now, biting at her cheeks as she walked to the bus stop. The paper in her purse seemed to burn against her hand. Her mind replayed every conversation of the past months, Evan's insistence on taking care of things, Clara's smile when she'd mentioned bills, the way mail had stopped coming directly to her. By the time she reached home, her legs trembled. Evan's car was already in the driveway. Inside, the smell of coffee and lemon polish greeted her like something falsely domestic. Evan looked up from the kitchen island when she entered. "Mom, where have you been at the bank?" The air seemed to still between them. He set down his mug slowly. "You should have told me. I could have taken you." "You've already taken enough," she said quietly, pulling the envelope from her bag and placing it on the counter. $400,000, Evan. My savings, my future." His face hardened. "You shouldn't have gone down there by yourself. You forged my signature," she said, her voice trembling. "You made yourself my guardian. Mom, please," he said, reaching for her arm. She pulled away. "Don't lie to me." His jaw clenched. "You don't understand? Then explain it." For a long moment he said nothing. Then he exhaled, heavily, running a hand through his hair. The project failed. The investors pulled out. I had loans, partnerships, contracts that depended on cash flow. Clara said we'd figure it out, that we could rebuild if we just bought time. You weren't using the money. It was sitting there. I only meant to borrow it until the deal came through. Grace's throat tightened. Borrow it. You drained everything I spent my life earning. I'm protecting you, he said suddenly, his voice rising. If I lose the house, the cars, everything, it all collapses. You'd be left with nothing. I did this for both of us. You did it to save yourself, she whispered. That's not the same thing. He looked away, his jaw tight. Clara said it was the only way to keep control before the banks came after me. She said if I became your guardian legally, the assets would be safe. Safe. Grace laughed softly, the sound brittle. You mean untouchable? He turned toward the window, unable to meet her gaze. It's temporary. Once I pay back the debts, I'll fix it. You can't fix this, Evan. Her voice was low, but firm. You've stolen from me, and you've made me into someone helpless in the eyes of the law. His shoulders stiffened. Mom, please stop dramatizing. You're tired. You don't see the big picture. She stared at him for a long time. The boy she remembered was still somewhere behind that hard expression. The boy who used to save his allowance to buy her roses every Mother's Day, who cried when his father missed his school play. "When did you stop being my son?" she asked softly. He flinched. "Don't say that. Then tell me why I feel like a stranger in my own house." The silence stretched heavy and suffocating. He said finally, "Because you are." The word struck deeper than he intended. She turned away, gripping the back of a chair to steady herself. "Go upstairs," he said softer now. "Rest. I'll take care of everything." She didn't respond. As she walked past him, her reflection in the window caught her eye. Small, faded, like a ghost walking through someone else's life. Upstairs, she closed her door, locked it, and pressed her forehead against the wood. Her breath came slow and uneven. On her nightstand lay the notebook where she had written her suspicions. She opened it and wrote one more line, in careful script. "My son has become my warden." 3 weeks passed after the confrontation in the kitchen, and silence became the uninvited guest in every corner of the Whitmore house. Evan spoke little Clara, not at all. Grace moved quietly from room to room, a presence barely noticed, like furniture no one used but couldn't throw away. The mornings were cold now, frost on the window panes, coffee growing bitter as it cooled. She had stopped asking questions. She had learned that in this house, questions had prices. One gray afternoon, as she sorted through the week's mail, a large brown envelope caught her eye. The postmark read Burlington, Vermont, and the handwriting, elegant and looping, stirred something deep in her memory. Emily Price. It had been 10 years since she last heard that name. They had met as young teachers in Raleigh, 2 women with chalk-stained fingers and an unshakable belief that words could change lives. Emily had retired north, married late, and written once a year until illness stole her pen. Grace's hands trembled as she opened the envelope. Inside was a folded letter, yellowed slightly at the edges, and beneath it, a notarized document. The letter began in Emily's familiar script. "My dear Grace, if you are reading this, I am gone. I have no children of my own, and I can think of no one more deserving of peace than you. The house in Vermont, our summer refuge all those years ago, is now yours. I have made sure of it. Do not let the world convince you you've had enough of dreams. Sometimes they come back when we think we have stopped deserving them." Grace read it twice, the words blurring through tears she hadn't realized were forming. The second document bore the title, Last Will and Testament of Emily J. Price. At the bottom it listed the property, 1 Residence 47 Brookside Lane, Woodstock, Vermont. Current estimated value $1,540,000. For a moment, the world tilted toward something brighter. A house. Not a fortune, but a place untouched by Evan's control, a place she could breathe. She folded the letter carefully, her heart beating fast for the first time in months. Then from the hallway, Clara's voice floated in soft and composed. "Mail today?" Grace turned sharply. "Just a few letters." Clara entered, drying her hands on a towel. Her eyes flicked to the papers in Grace's hand, her smile polite but fixed. "Anything interesting?" an old friend, Grace said, tucking the letter back into the envelope. "From Vermont." Clara tilted her head. "Vermont? That's far." "Yes," Grace replied, "but not too far." Something unreadable passed through Clara's expression, gone as quickly as it came. She reached for the kettle. "You should rest, Grace. You've been tired lately. I told Evan we might look at some care options just to help you manage things more comfortably." "Care options," Grace repeated. "You mean a nursing home?" "Please," Clara said with a gentle laugh. "Not that word. They're wonderful facilities. Beautiful, really. Gardens, art classes. You'd love it." Grace watched her pour the tea, the steam curling like secrets between them. "Why now?" she asked quietly. Clara smiled, that perfectly measured smile that never touched her eyes. "Because it's time to think about your well-being, and about family responsibilities. You know how stressful things have been for Evan, he told me," Grace said. "About the debts, about the house he almost lost." Clara's tone didn't change. "He's doing everything he can. You raised a good man, Grace." The compliment felt like a blade wrapped in velvet. "He's lucky to have you guiding him," Grace replied, matching her tone. "Oh, I only want what's best for him, and for you, of course." Clara placed the teacup in front of her, the porcelain clinking softly. "You'll think about it, won't you? The care home in Blue Ridge, it's only temporary until everything settles." Grace nodded, though her heart pounded. "Of course, I'll think about it." That night she couldn't sleep. The Vermont letter lay open on her desk, the ink glinting faintly under the lamplight. She reached for her notebook and began to write her sentences careful and slow. Today, a letter from Emily Price arrived. A will. A house in Vermont. "Clara knows something. She wants me out." The words steadied her. She turned the envelope over and noticed the faint crease where it had been resealed. Someone had already opened it once before. She held it to the light. The flap showed the faint trace of another adhesive, a tampering invisible at first glance. Her pulse quickened. She checked the postmark again. The date was 10 days earlier than the delivery stamp. It had been delayed, or intercepted. She sat back, the chair creaking beneath her, and thought of Clara's too perfect composure, her calm insistence that Grace rest. It fit now. Everything fit. The push for guardianship, the forged medical report, the Cedorex, none of it had been random. Clara had known about the Vermont inheritance before Grace ever did. The realization chilled her. Somewhere upstairs, a door closed softly. Grace froze. Through the thin ceiling, she heard the faint rhythm of footsteps, slow and deliberate, moving toward her end of the hall. She blew out the lamp and sat still in the dark, listening. After a moment, the footsteps retreated. She exhaled shakily, pressing a hand over her chest. In the darkness, her mind replayed Emily's words. "Do not let the world convince you you've had enough of dreams." She repeated them under her breath, a quiet promise to the friend who still spoke from beyond the years. The rain began just after midnight, steady at first, then growing into a curtain of sound against the roof. Grace lay awake, her breath shallow, her heart counting the seconds between thunder and silence. The letter from Emily sat folded beneath her pillow, the paper softened by the warmth of her head. Down the hall, the faint hum of voices drifted from Evan and Clara's room, low, sharp, the sound of plans being made. She caught fragments. Facility, safe transfer, paperwork done. The words were enough. Grace sat up slowly, her bones protesting. Her decision had already been made. The rest was only motion. She pulled her old suitcase from beneath the bed, its leather cracked and corners worn. It had been Robert's once, back when they took road trips through Carolina, before the world had become so complicated. She set it on the bed and began to pack 2 sweaters, her thickest coat, a few photographs, the notebook, and Emily's letter. She wrapped them in the plastic bag she found in the closet, tying it twice with trembling fingers. Every sound seemed too loud, the click of the zipper, the creak of floorboards, the whisper of hangers as she took her scarf. When she looked in the mirror, she barely recognized the woman staring back. Her gray hair was pinned neatly, her eyes hollow but clear. "You taught him to read, to think, to love," she whispered to the reflection. "Now teach yourself to survive." She waited until the house was still. Evan's voice faded, then the muffled thud of the bedroom door. The rain masked everything now. She slipped on her boots, heavy and lined with age, and opened her door. The hallway was dark, except for the faint light from the night lamp near the stairs. She moved quietly, her hand trailing the wall for balance. The smell of lemon polish and candle wax filled the air. Clara's scent, too clean, too careful. At the bottom of the stairs, she paused. On the kitchen counter sat the Cedorex bottle, half full, and beside it a folded brochure, Blue Ridge Memory Center, a place for peace. The sight hardened her resolve. She turned toward the back door, unlocked it, and stepped into the night. The cold hit her like a memory. Rain soaked her coat within seconds, but she didn't stop. She walked down the narrow street until the house disappeared behind her, its lights blurring through the rain. The bus stop was a half-mile away. Each step splashed through puddles, the water biting into her shoes. By the time she reached the shelter, Her suitcase was dripping, her hair plastered to her face. A lone bus arrived, its headlights slicing through the darkness. The driver looked at her curiously. "Late night to be traveling, ma'am. Family in Vermont," she said. "They're expecting me." He nodded, taking her fare without question. The bus was nearly empty, just 2 passengers asleep near the back. Grace took a seat by the window, clutching her bag close. The city lights faded behind her, replaced by long stretches of highway and the endless drumming of rain. She thought of Evan as a boy, his small hand in hers as they crossed streets, his laugh when he brought home his first A on a spelling test. Somewhere along the years, that boy had been buried under ambition and fear. She pressed her forehead against the glass, whispering to the dark, "If you ever remember who you were, remember that I loved you even then." Hours blurred into gray dawn. When she awoke, the rain had stopped, and the mountains rose outside the window like faded ghosts. The bus rolled into Woodstock, Vermont, just as morning broke. Grace stepped off with her suitcase and a stiffness in her legs that made every movement deliberate. The air smelled of pine and cold earth. The taxi driver at the corner recognized the address she gave, Brookside Lane. "That old Price place," he said. "Hasn't been lived in for years." "I know," Grace replied softly. "I'm family." The house stood at the end of a dirt road, its paint-peeling shutters askew, the yard overgrown with weeds. She paid the driver and waited until his taillights disappeared before she pushed the front gate. It groaned open, the sound echoing like a sigh. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the faint scent of wood rot. She set her suitcase down in the parlor, where a single armchair and a cracked lamp remained. Sunlight filtered through the boarded windows, cutting through the gloom in narrow beams. Grace found a box of matches in the kitchen drawer and a stub of a candle near the sink. When she lit it, the flame flickered weakly, then steadied, casting soft gold across the walls. She sat by the window and pulled 2 photographs from her bag, one of Evan at 7, missing his front teeth, holding a baseball glove. The other of Lily and Max, her grandchildren, smiling in their Halloween costumes. She set them beside the candle. The room felt less empty than filled with the ghosts of her intentions. She took a sheet of paper from her notebook and began to write in her careful teacher's script. "If you find this, it means I chose to live on my own terms. If you have any kindness left in you, remember this: I once saved you. Now I am saving myself." Her hand shook slightly as she folded the note and placed it under the photographs. The candle's flame danced against the glass of the frames, illuminating their faces. Outside, the wind picked up again, rattling the shutters. She drew her coat tighter and leaned back, letting the quiet of the old house settle around her. For the first time in months, no one was watching. No voices called her name. No pills waited by her cup. Only the steady rhythm of rain against the roof and the sound of her own breathing, proof that she was for this moment free. The first knock came just after dawn, soft but insistent, echoing through the quiet of the old Vermont house. Grace stirred from the armchair where she had fallen asleep, the candle long extinguished, the smell of wax and rain still lingering. For a moment she thought she was dreaming. No one knew she was here. She hesitated, her hand hovering over the doorknob, and then came a second knock, firmer this time. She opened the door. Evan stood on the porch, his coat soaked through his eyes, hollow with exhaustion. He looked older than his 35 years, the lines on his face carved deep by sleepless nights. "Mom," he said, his voice cracking, "you shouldn't have come here." Grace stared at him for a long moment before stepping aside. "Neither should you." He entered without a word, shaking off the cold. The house was dim, the morning light slipping in through cracks between the shutters. "How did you find me?" she asked. "Clara traced the bus ticket," he replied, his tone flat. "She said you took the inheritance letter." She was worried. "About me or the money?" Grace asked quietly. He didn't answer. She poured tea into chipped mugs, the sound of liquid filling the silence between them. "I needed to see you," he said finally. "You can't just disappear. There are papers to sign, things we have to sort out." Grace set the cup in front of him. "You mean things Clara wants to sort out?" Evan rubbed his temples, the same gesture he'd used since childhood whenever he was cornered. "She's trying to help. She's trying to own you," Grace said. "And she's succeeding." His jaw tightened. "You think you understand everything, but you don't. You never did." She met his gaze. "Then explain it to me. Explain how my son became the man who forged his mother's name and stole her life." He slammed his palm against the table, making the tea slosh. "You think I wanted this? You think I asked for any of it? You don't know what it's like to live every day waiting for something to destroy you." Grace's voice softened. "What did you do, Evan?" He froze. The question hung in the air like smoke. For a moment she saw fear flicker behind his anger. The same fear she had seen 26 years ago on a night drenched in rain and sirens. "It's been following you since 1999, she said quietly. He looked up sharply, his eyes wide. "Don't. You were 21. You'd been drinking with your friends after finals. You shouldn't have driven, but you did. You were tired, the road was slick, and she crossed at the wrong moment." Evan's breathing quickened. "Stop it!" Grace continued, her tone steady but trembling beneath the weight of memory. "Her name was Sarah Palmer, 19 years old. She died before the ambulance came. You told me through tears that it was an accident, that you didn't see her. I believed you." He stood abruptly, pacing. "I didn't mean to. I swear I didn't." "I know," she said softly, "but meaning doesn't erase consequence. You would have gone to prison. You begged me to help, and I did." Evan turned toward her, eyes red. "You don't know what that did to me." "I do," she said, "because it did the same to me." The rain outside began again, gentle against the windows, as if echoing their words. Grace rose, moving to the old cabinet by the fireplace. From the bottom drawer, she pulled a faded manila folder tied with string. She placed it on the table between them. "The police report," she said. "The lawyer's letters. The check I wrote to the Palmer family to make it disappear. All of it." Evan stared at the folder as if it might burn him. "Why do you still have this? Because guilt doesn't vanish when paper does." She said, "I kept it to remind myself what love can cost." He sank back into the chair, burying his face in his hands. "Clara found out," he said after a long pause. Grace felt her stomach drop. "How last year," he continued. "I kept the old briefcase from college, the one you gave me. There was a newspaper clipping inside about the accident. She found it when she was cleaning the office. She didn't say anything at first, just looked at me differently after that. Then when the business started collapsing, she reminded me what I owed to her, to you, to everyone. She said if the truth ever came out, everything would be gone. My career, our reputation, your life. She said the only way to fix it was to secure the money before the past did." Grace closed her eyes, feeling the weight of her own complicity press against her chest. "So she used your guilt," she whispered. "And you let her." "I didn't know what else to do," he said, his voice cracking. "She said we were protecting the family. She said you'd never understand." Grace's hands trembled as she reached across the table, touching the folder. "I thought I buried that night to save you," she said. "But I only buried the part of you that could ever forgive yourself." Evan looked at her, his face pale. "She's still at the house," he said quietly. "She thinks you're signing over the Vermont property this week. If you don't, she'll make sure everyone knows what happened in 1999. Grace's pulse quickened. "She can't." "She can," he said. "She has copies, newspapers, witness statements, everything." He looked down at his shaking hands. "She told me if I didn't get you to sign, she'd ruin both of us." Grace studied her son, the broken man who had once been a frightened boy, in her arms, and felt the ache of all the years between them. "Then it's time," she said softly, "that someone tells the truth." Evan met her eyes, searching for forgiveness he wasn't sure existed. The rain outside turned harder, drumming on the roof until their voices were swallowed by the storm. The snow began early that morning, quiet and unassuming, blanketing the Vermont hills in white. Grace stood at the window, the light gray and cold against her face, watching the flakes drift down, like pieces of time falling too slowly to matter. Evan sat at the table behind her, the folder still open. Its contents spread out like ghosts, letters, forged medical reports, the guardianship papers, and copies of the bank withdrawals. His hands were motionless, his eyes hollow. "You're really doing this?" he said softly. I have to, Grace replied, her tone calm but resolute. The truth doesn't heal until it's spoken. They'll arrest me, he whispered. Maybe, she said, turning toward him, but maybe they'll save what's left of you. He shook his head, running his hand through his hair. You don't understand. Clara will ruin everything. She'll turn it all on me. Then let her, Grace said quietly. She's already taken everything else. She gathered the papers into a neat stack, tied them with the same string she had used to bind her old letters, and slipped them into her handbag. Evan watched as she put on her coat. Where are you going to the police? She said. There's a station in town. He rose suddenly. Mom, wait. You'll destroy us. No, she said, meeting his eyes. I'll free us. The drive into town was silent. The snow thickened, soft and relentless. When Grace stepped into the small police station, the warmth inside felt almost foreign. The officer at the desk looked up surprised to see an elderly woman holding a soaked leather bag. Can I help you, ma'am? Yes, she said, setting the folder down gently. I need to report a crime. Hours passed in quiet interviews, her voice steady as she recounted the months of manipulation, the drugs, the forged signatures, the stolen money. She gave them the evidence and her written statement. When it was over, she sat for a moment, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The officer's tone softened. You did the right thing, Mrs. Whitmore. I know, she said, but right doesn't always feel good. Back at the Vermont house, Evan sat in the silence that followed her departure. He had tried to call Clara 3 times, but each attempt went to voicemail. When his phone finally buzzed, it was with an email notification. The subject line read simply, "Goodbye." He hesitated before opening it. The message was brief. You're weaker than I thought. You always were, just like your mother. There was no signature, no explanation, just the digital echo of contempt. He read it twice, his breath catching somewhere between rage and disbelief. Then something in him broke, not loudly, not with anger, but quietly like glass under pressure. He sank to the floor, the phone still in his hand. Clara had disappeared. She had transferred what remained of their joint account, leaving him with debts investigations, and the ruin of everything he'd tried to preserve. Outside, the snow kept falling heavier now, pressing against the windows like hands. Grace returned just after dusk. She found him sitting on the porch steps, coatless, the snow gathering on his shoulders. Evan, she called softly. He didn't look up. She stepped closer, the crunch of snow under her boots the only sound. It's done, she said. The police have everything. He nodded slowly, still staring into the distance. They called, he murmured. Said they were sending someone to take my statement, then tell the truth, she said, all of it. And you, he asked. What happens to you now? I'll be fine, she said. I've lived through worse. He gave a small, broken laugh. I doubt that. You'd be surprised, she replied, her voice tender. Guilt ages you faster than time. The snow turned to sleet, sharp and cold. Grace reached out, brushing the flakes from his hair. He flinched at her touch, then let her hand rest there. I never meant for any of this, he said. I just wanted to fix things. You can't fix what you don't face, she said gently. And you've been running from this for half your life. He looked up finally, his eyes red and wet. I'm sorry, Mom. The words were small, almost lost in the wind. I know, she whispered. He bowed his head again, his shoulders shaking. For the first time since he was a child, he wept openly, the sound raw and human. The snow clung to his lashes, melting into tears that froze on his cheeks. Grace stood beside him, silent, the old ache in her chest, returning not anger now, but something deeper, an understanding of how love and pain could coexist without ever balancing each other. When the police car pulled into the driveway an hour later, its lights reflecting off the snow, Evan didn't move. He sat with his hands clasped, breathing slowly, as though waiting for a judgment that had already been delivered. Grace watched from the porch, her heart both breaking and mending in the same breath. The snow had begun to melt when Evan was taken into custody. The Vermont air smelled of damp pine and cold metal, the kind of air that carried every sound too far. Grace watched from the porch as the officers guided her son into the back seat of the cruiser. He didn't resist, didn't look back. The sound of the door closing was soft, almost merciful. After they left, she sat alone in the quiet that followed the echo of her heartbeat, louder than the wind. Days passed. The investigation deepened, spreading like cracks in glass. Reporters began to call, asking questions about the Whitmore case, about forged medical records, and missing funds. Grace didn't answer. Her body, already frail, began to falter under the weight of the cold Vermont winter. The coughing started one morning as she boiled tea, sharp and relentless. By the third day, she could no longer stand without dizziness. A neighbor found her collapsed near the window and called for help. The hospital was small, its halls smelling faintly of antiseptic and lavender. She was admitted with pneumonia, the doctor's voice calm but serious. "You'll need rest," he said. "No stress, no excitement. Your lungs are tired." Grace smiled faintly. "So is the rest of me." A week later, a nurse brought her a small, brown envelope without a return address. "Delivered early this morning," she said. Grace turned it over. The handwriting was familiar, Evans unmistakable in its heavy, deliberate strokes. Her hands trembled as she unfolded the pages. The first line made her chest tighten. "Mom, I don't know if this will ever reach you, but I need to try." The words blurred for a moment before she blinked them clear. "I used to think strength meant control, raising my voice, deciding for everyone else, fixing things before they broke. I thought I was protecting you by taking over, but all I did was take away your dignity. You gave me life more than once, and I repaid you with pride. When I threw that glass of water, I thought I was teaching you respect. Now I know I was drowning in my own fear." She paused, pressing the paper to her chest. The words felt like confession and punishment all at once. She continued reading. "I don't expect forgiveness. I just want you to know that everything I am, good or bad, came from you. I used to resent how calm you were when the world turned cruel. I mistook silence for weakness. Now I understand it was strength I didn't yet have. You carried me when I didn't deserve it. And now, if you can please, don't carry me anymore. Let me stand. Let me fall. Let me finally pay for what I've done." A tear slid down her cheek, tracing the hollow line of her face. She read the last lines through blurred vision. "You once told me that love isn't about protection. It's about truth. You were right. I see that now. I thought power came from money, from control, from never admitting fault. But real power is choosing to tell the truth, even when it breaks you. You did that, Mom. You always did. If this letter never reaches you, it's all right. I just needed to say it somewhere to someone who once believed I could be better." The signature was smudged, the ink faintly damp, as if written in haste or tears. Grace pressed the letter to her lips, her breath catching. The nurse returned moments later to check her vitals. "Bad news?" she asked gently. Grace shook her head. "No," she whispered. "Just truth." Outside the window, the afternoon sun caught on the thin layer of snow still clinging to the trees. It glowed briefly, then disappeared into shadow. Later that day, the district attorney called. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said, "given your son's cooperation, the court would consider leniency if you requested it. A letter from you could make a difference." Grace listened in silence. When he finished, she spoke softly. "No. Let the law finish what love began." The man hesitated. "Are you sure, quite sure?" she said. "He needs to face it. For once, he needs to stand on his own." After hanging up, she sat quietly, the letter still on her lap. For years she had believed that love was a shield, something that could stop harm before it struck. But now she understood that love could also be a mirror, forcing those we care for to see themselves clearly, even if the sight broke them. She folded the letter and tucked it into her Bible between the pages of Psalms. Then she closed her eyes and whispered, "Be free, Evan. Not from punishment, but from the lie that mercy means forgetting." The nurse dimmed the lights as evening fell. Grace's breathing slowed, the steady hum of the heart monitor filling the room. Somewhere outside, the snow began again, quiet and soft, like forgiveness descending on a world that had finally stopped fighting. 2 years later, the morning light over Vermont carried a kind of stillness that only late autumn knew how to hold. The trees stood bare but beautiful, their branches tracing veins across a sky the color of quiet forgiveness. Evan pushed the broom across the tiled hallway of Maplewood High, his steps steady, his movements unhurried. The scent of floor polish mixed with chalk dust and the faint echo of students' laughter. Every day began the same: arrive before dawn, unlock the side doors, sweep the corridors that once echoed with his mother's voice. The name Mrs. Grace Whitmore still hung on a plaque outside classroom 214, gold letters, dulled by time, but untouched by memory. He stopped there each morning, fingers brushing over the metal. "Morning, Mom," he whispered, then resumed his work. The students didn't know his story, and he didn't offer it. To them, he was just Mr. Whitmore, the quiet custodian who fixed lockers, polished floors, and sometimes left a small, folded note of encouragement for the ones sitting alone at lunch. He had learned the rhythm of humility, the peace that came from work without recognition. Sometimes when the hallways emptied and the sun slanted through the tall windows, he imagined hearing his mother's laugh, a sound soft and certain, as if reminding him that redemption was not found in words, but in work done faithfully. Grace never saw him free. She passed away the previous autumn in the same quiet way she had lived, without spectacle, without bitterness. The pneumonia returned, and though the doctors urged her to fight, she told them gently, "I've already made peace with all my storms." She spent her final weeks writing letters, one to her lawyer, one to the principal of Maplewood High, and one to Evan, sealed and left unread until after her burial. When she was gone, the town gathered in the small chapel that overlooked the maple grove behind the school. No cameras came, no reporters. Just a handful of former students, neighbors, and one man standing in the back with his hands folded, the son she had forgiven without ever saying the words aloud. Her lawyer read the contents of her final will. Grace had left the Vermont property to fund a trust, the Whitmore Foundation for Forgotten Teachers. The money from the sale of the old house, combined with her modest savings, would create scholarships for retired educators who had spent their lives teaching in rural schools without recognition. It was a tribute not only to her late sister Eleanor, who had once dreamed of becoming a teacher, but never had the chance, but also to every quiet voice that had shaped generations without ever standing in the spotlight. Evan learned of the foundation from her lawyer weeks after the funeral. The news broke something inside him, but in a way that healed. It was as if she had left him one final lesson: that legacy was not measured in what we took, but in what we gave away. Months passed. He stayed in Vermont, choosing not to return to the city, not to chase money or repair a reputation that no longer mattered. The school gave him steady work and a small apartment near the woods. On weekends, he volunteered at the foundation's new office downtown, sorting applications and reading letters from teachers who wrote of chalk-stained years and fading paychecks. Each story felt like a thread from his mother's life, woven into something larger than either of them. When autumn came again, the maple leaves turned the color of gold coins scattered by wind. On the morning of the foundation's first anniversary, a small memorial was held at Grace's grave in the hillside cemetery behind the school. The stone was simple: Grace Eleanor Whitmore, 1948, 2027. She taught the world to remember. Evan arrived early, carrying a single white rose and an envelope worn at the edges. The ground was damp from the night's rain, the air sharp with the scent of soil and wood smoke. He knelt before the stone, the rose trembling slightly in his hand. "You always said autumn was your favorite," he murmured. "Said it was proof that endings could still be beautiful." He placed the rose at the base of the stone and opened the envelope. Inside was the letter he had written over the long winter in the small apartment where he lived alone. His handwriting was uneven, but every word carried the weight of clarity. He began to read softly. "Mom, I used to believe that redemption was something given, but I've learned it's something earned. You once told me the truth can hurt, but it's the only pain that heals. I didn't understand then. I thought forgiveness was about escaping the past. But now I know it's about carrying it until it changes shape. I'm still carrying it, but it's lighter now." His voice trembled as he reached the final lines. "I once made you wet your face with water out of anger and pride. Now I let my tears fall to wash away what's left of my guilt. You taught me how to stand again, not by holding me up, but by letting me fall." He folded the letter, pressed it against the cold stone, and whispered, "Thank you for not saving me." The wind stirred the leaves, scattering them across the graveyard in small, rust-colored spirals. In the distance, the church bell rang at noon. Evan rose, brushing the dirt from his knees, and looked toward the school, where children's laughter drifted faintly through the trees. He smiled a quiet, fragile smile, but one that belonged entirely to the present. Then he turned and walked down the hill back toward the life he was still learning to live, one humble act at a time. If this story moved you, take a moment to let me know, leave a comment, and tell me which moment struck you the most. Was it the night Grace walked out into the rain, or the letter Evan left behind? I'd love to hear what you think and where you're watching from. And if you want to hear more stories like this, one quiet, human, and true, make sure to subscribe and stay with me for the next chapter.